not been through this before, we record the session to put it up on YouTube later on. There's about 70 topics that are still planned, one a month. Next month will probably be truck and marine transportation, since if you're taking the CSP, they've been asking a lot of questions about the marine safety laws, and so we'll cover that. Now we'll go into the questions as I see them in the chat, or you can just unmute. But just make sure everybody knows that I don't put the actual question from a test or anything else in a book. I have to rewrite every question because the Board of Certified Safety Professionals is pretty strict about that. In the old days, we could do that, but that's not been the rule for the last 5 years. So we just focus on the topic, and then I just make a question related to that topic. So some of them are easy, some of them are hard. For the tests for welding, it's in ASP Domain 4, CSP Domain 4, CHST Domain 1, and the STSC Domain 2. And again, you may get 0 questions related to welding hot works, or you may get 5 or 6. It has been very random this year. Some people have 0 math, some people have gotten 10 math, some get 0 confined space, some have got as many as 10. So it tends to get questions in the domain. The bank is very large, thousands of questions. One of my goals is to hopefully increase, eventually get 100,000 credentials. As of yesterday, 58,000 people have gotten credentials. In our BCSP study group, we have probably 15 to 20 passes a month on there. So without that, let's get in. If we look at the welding, cutting, brazing by OSHA, the same things are often cited over and over, and you'll see these 5 standards by OSHA all the time. And this is a source of questions for a lot of the exams. You must have oxygen stored a safe distance from fuel gas cylinders, or have a half-hour fire-rated wall. And we'll go into more of these in details. If you're doing arc welding, the light is very intense, and you must have some kind of shielding so you're not going to be looking at it or getting a glare as a bystander. Cylinders storage inside buildings must be in a well-ventilated area. That means it's got to have some ventilation. There's an old interpretation that talks about it has to be below 10% of the LEL from the 70s. Most people go to 6 air changes an hour. That's a common one in an area storing flammables. And again, oxygen should not be stored next to combustibles. It can actually make grease ignite, or would add more fuel to the fire if it's leaking. And then valve protection caps for oxygen have to be put on. If they're not oxygen, they're like propane, you'd go to the Compressed Gas Association Manual 1965, which is under the OSHA standard 1910-101. So again, this is a common test question. If you're going to get anyone, I would pick this as the common one. Oxygen cylinders will be separated from fuel gas by 20 feet. The oxygen cylinder weighs 50 kilograms, or about 110 pounds. So a lot of people do not want to move this at the end of the day if it's in a welding cart. A lot easier to put a non-combustible barrier at least 5 feet high, of a fire rating of half hour. Pure steel does not have any fire rating. It won't transmit the heat, therefore you can't use it. Drywall, you can get a half hour fire rating. And OSHA cites it quite often. If this company up in Connecticut, they had the cylinders next to the propane and acetylene, a gasoline can, and cardboard combustible boxes, and that was a $19,000 citation. So what we have is cylinders also have to be secured. That's not in the top 5, but it is often an issue that comes up on OSHA inspections. And they're going to require you to have it in an area. Even though they put nice little channels here, you can imagine if this thing falls over, it could get damaged. With the valve cap screwed in place, probably nothing will happen. If it doesn't have the valve cap on, it can break off and fly like a rocket. So companies have made devices and carts to store oxygen and acetylene. Remember, what you're worried about is that it transmits heat. There's a fire and one cylinder is leaking like propane or acetylene, and now it's impacting on the oxygen. Uh, Hopefully it won't be transmitting the heat enough to cause the oxygen cylinder to release and then release a lot of oxygen. So safety cart puts a half-hour fire-rated barrier tested at a national recognized testing laboratory to get that in there. It's filled with gypsum type of compound, which is like your drywall compound, and that gives it a half-hour fire rating. They put a little box where you can put your regulators because those are very expensive. People do not want them stolen. Place to wrap up your oxygen acetylene hoses, and even a lifting eye for $1,000. When this came out 10 years ago, I thought, wow, that's expensive. But this person has sold over 100,000 of these. So a good idea can be very profitable if you know what you're doing. So you're going to see knowledge checks. When you go to the BCSP, I always put a number down. That's where it would be. I don't have a PDF of all my questions. Someday I will get to it, but I'm not in a hurry for that. I just put up 3 questions a day. You have an oxygen cylinder and acetylene cylinder stored within 1 foot of each other. Which would be the most appropriate solution to the hazard? Note the cylinders were not stored on a cart. A, separate the cylinders by a minimum of 10 feet. B, place the cylinders in an explosion-proof room. C, separate the cylinders by a 5-foot, half-hour fire-rated wall. Or D, use dilution ventilation to control the fire hazards created by the leaking cylinders. So you can type in chat A, B, C, or D, and that's what we'll do. Again, people on YouTube will not be able to see your answers. Very good. The answer is C. Separate by a 5-foot, half-hour fire-rated wall, which is like the cart. The welding screens can be either plastic or canvas or cloth-like material, as long as they're going to keep the sparks from flying. You don't want to use a combustible material as a shield, and this will prevent the sparks from hitting people, and as well as the arc welding rays possibly causing a burn in the eye, a retina or a cornea. For people that have had this, as they said, it's like little black dots that float in the eye. When they look, they'll have a little black spot, and they have to turn their head or move their eye just so they can see you or read something. They get used to it a while, but they kind of wish they didn't have to have that, and that's because you looked at the light of the sun or arc welding too much. And then persons next to the welding area shall be protected by non-combustible flame-proof shields, or you're going to wear welding goggles. A lot easier to put the shields up. The shield at the bottom is only $100 at the most to make. I would put it on wheels so you can just move it around. What is it if you don't have welding shields? Did not have it, $26,000 by OSHA. That's a lot of money. This company got a willful for $44,000. 5 welding stations were not enclosed by combustible screens. So most of the companies I go to, they're pretty good about this. Valve protection caps always shall be screwed in. This prevents it if it falls over to break the nozzle here, which now can be pressurized. There are several videos. I like the one by the Mythbusters where they cut it off and it goes through a concrete block wall because it's like a rocket with all that pressure inside. So it's hand tight when it's up in cylinders. Make sure we always put our oxygen symbol. You have to put the hazard warning of oxygen. It's an oxidizer. That means it's going to add a lot of oxygen to a fire, which then could cause it to explode. The welding shades are based on the intensity of light, and if you're doing stick welding or arc welding, you're going to sit there and have a higher shield rating. They have welding shields that will be changing to the intensity of light, but it's almost like the sun. I mean, metal inert gas welding is MIG welding. It's still going to require it. It's going to use a shielding gas, probably argon. Then if it's aluminum, MIG, or flux cord, or tungsten inert gas welding, TIG welding, it'll require a lesser shade possibly, depending on the intensity of light. And that's important because these are based on light intensity levels. Knowledge check number 3. OSHA requires screen protection from what welding rates? Brazing, B, soldering, C, smoke, D, arc. Excellent, it is arc welding. Inside of buildings, the cylinder shall be stored in a well-protected, well-ventilated, dry location at least 20 feet from combustible materials such as oil or gas or Excelsior. Welding does not say in the OSHA laws what well-ventilated is. There's an interpretation. It has to be ventilation. It keeps it below the lower explosive limit from the 1970s. ACGIH, American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, says 6 air changes per hour. ASHRAE, the refrigeration group, uses 10 cubic feet per person. You will have some ventilation. No ventilation would be a violation. So here we have several cylinders. You notice some of these cylinders don't have the proper labeling of oxygen or oxidizer on there. That would be a violation of HAZCOM. And is that really going to work with a rope to a chain to prevent these from falling? Probably not. Oxygen cylinders shall not be stored near highly combustible materials, especially oil and grease, near stocks of carbine or acetylene. What we have over here is the propane cylinders for a forklift or other fuel gas cylinders. So that's what that would be. Or near substances cause a fire. Again, 20 foot is our magic rule. There are several fatalities in welding. It's usually in confined space that I see it, in my experience. If we go back to 2001, the welder was doing TIG welding, tungsten inert gas welding, in a confined space and suffered argon asphyxiation. Argon is a gas that is colorless, odorless, and twice as heavy as normal air. And it'll fill up the bottom of the confined space and slowly dilute the oxygen. And if you don't have a combustible gas meter, which has oxygen, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, and lower LEL meter, you're not going to notice this lowering of the oxygen. And you could pass out and then possibly die like this person in 2001. What's in welding fume? You think a lot of stuff with welding safety would not talk about the health hazards, but there's going to be different health hazards that are going to ask on all the tests. And so I try to put the welding health hazards in the welding section, and in the other ones related to welding could be in the, other ones that are related to other gases in confined space, like, methane and hydrogen sulfide, and then industrial hygiene would have the rest of them. In the old days, there was a lot of different material. It depends where you're at. Some countries have very strict safety and health rules. Some countries do not. They are toxic metals like arsenic and lead. They don't necessarily kill you right away, but they can cause long-term health effects that are very toxic. And we've had a lot of issues with lead in the United States, with our pipes having pure lead going from the water supply to the person's house. And we've had people get high lead levels. High lead levels for the homeowner or the apartment person means that the lead is going to affect them, but worst of all, it's going to affect the children that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it affects their brain development if the water has so many micrograms of lead. Cadmium and chromium I put in red because these are cancer-causing metals. Exposure to high levels of these metals in the fume is going to be possible cancer 10, 20, 30 years from now. What we show is a fume hood. They make portable versions of these on wheels. They have them in a lot of shops where we teach people basic welding. It's going to draw the fume. Fume is the metal going to metal droplets. You always hear people talk about on the news carbon monoxide fume. That's incorrect. It should be carbon monoxide vapor. Metals are the fume, the liquid in the air. So you're breathing metal fume. Also, if you grind, you don't create metal fume, you create metal dust. It's a subtle distinction, but if you have to sample for welding, they'll sample for all these metals on one a cassette, and it'll analyze how much of each metal is in that. Again, we want to make sure the fume hood is, going to draw the breathing zone. I've had big companies, the largest in the world, the workers are bending over and this ventilation's above their head, and that's breathing in too much of that metal fume. Residential lead, I put it in there because, we have a lot of buildings over 100 years old. In 1980, they kind of pretty well banned the lead in the paint, but lead could be 20% by weight in there. And if you had lead paint on wood or other surfaces, they would use a heat gun to take and atomize this paint away and then scrape it off. The trouble is that person who's doing this is creating lead fume. And if you have old paint, like up in where I'm at by Chicago, there was also cadmium and arsenic as metals in the paint. So when you go into these standards for welding or cutting or heating, you will have to have a written program for lead, cadmium, and arsenic. You have to have documented training for lead, cadmium, and arsenic, the hazards of lead, hazards of arsenic, hazards of cadmium. You must do some sampling to determine what the level is above the action level, AL. You must wear protective clothing because you cannot get the lead or cadmium or arsenic on your clothing. You'll take it home. And then they have to provide Tyvek or other suits that you would change into to do this work, and then change and possibly decon through a shower in the area. And then, of course, you have to have sanitary hands to eat it, because you can ingest any of these metals and get overexposure to that. So it's a lot of tough issues. That's what I mean by an expanded standard. Lead, cadmium, arsenic, chromium have expanded standards which contain all these elements. Hexavalent chromium is a fume from welding on stainless. It has nickel and chromium exposure. It's in some cements, but the parts that you can breathe in are about 5 micrograms in a day. Now, you're normally going to breathe in 2 liters a minute in a nice relaxed classroom like this. At the end of 8 hours, you're going to breathe in 960 liters, which is about a cubic meter. People in Europe and Middle East and Asia, they know the metric system, but the United States is tough. So we're talking 5 micrograms. That's very small. One Tylenol pill could be 250 milligrams, and a microgram is 1 milligram to 1,000 micrograms. So you're talking a minute particle in your refrigerator of air that you're breathing. What happens in hexavalent chromium, you can get ulcers, you can get perforated nose, and eventually lung cancer if you get high enough exposures over the period of 30 years. These numbers are all based on exposures for 30 years. So, you may get a lot in a day and then you don't do it for 10 years. Not so bad. Cadmium is a very good rust coating. It doesn't rust very well. I've seen people cut 4 of these bolts and go to the hospital with cadmium fume overexposure. That's really bad. That means you have so much cadmium metal in your lungs and your blood system that they have to medically remove you, and you're having severe problems, plus potential for cancer down the road. I just show pictures of these cadmium bolts because the black is a very unique, non-shiny, dull, chalkish black, I call it. And the other one, somebody calls them gold. I don't know if that's really gold. It's kind of like a bronze, but it's a unique color, and I show that. Those are cases where you're trying to cut the bolts off of a sprinkler system because they might have water on it. You would not want to use a welding torch. You just want to get a metal cutting bandsaw, or better yet, just hydraulic bolt cutters. Manganese, I sample, the companies hire industrial hygienists to sample. My days of sampling are over. But the ACGIH, threshold limit value, now that's not the law, that's updated every year, set a limit of 0.02 milligrams per cubic meter. Again, a very small amount. If you're in this situation where he's breathing that fume for 10-15 minutes, you'll probably be over on that manganese. And it's similar to Parkinson's. You know, when I see people have it, they shake, but it's not Parkinson's, but it's an effect on the body that's similar to Parkinson's. So if I'm going to guess, you know, on the exposure, that's going to be there. If you have a metal coated with zinc called galvanizing in the United States, you can get metal fume fever from breathing in too much zinc fume. And so again, we're showing people with portable exhaust on welding. This is necessary for the welder's, you know, health. You could use respirators as a substitute, but again, on the hierarchy of controls, engineering ventilation is better than PPE. And the effects of this are, you know, pneumonia, joint pains is what I see all the time, headaches, fatigue, and these are issues that they will ask you on the test. So even though you said the safety side, the health side might be the questions. Knowledge check 16. The welder's in a ship deck welding steel plates to the interior of the ship. The temperature in the vault is 95 degrees Fahrenheit with a humidity of 85% after 2 hours of operations. The welder complains he does not feel good. He has pale white complexion, nausea, headaches, rapid pulse, and low blood pressure, which describes the condition that's most likely caused his illness. A. Siderosis. B. Welder flash syndrome. C. Heat exhaustion. D. Chrome fume fever. Now I picked something completely different. These scenario questions are so popular on this test. The answer is C, heat exhaustion. Anytime you start seeing temperatures, that's an indication. Pale white, nausea, headaches, rapid pulse, low blood pressure associated with possibly heat exhaustion, dehydration. This is an issue that comes up quite a bit. You don't have any need to look at this person welding, but he's missing the screens. And the reflective light can sit there and cause you to have welding flash. And for some people, it feels like sandpaper's in their eyes, and it hurts. The only way to deal with it from the medical side is to give you morphine sulfate, which is a prescription over-the-counter drug. This worker lost 3 days of time with the eye issues. So it's a OSHA recordable injury. It would be recordable because it is a prescription drug. And this is just, you know, a simple case that costs a couple $1,000s that you didn't have to have by putting 3 screens around the area and isolating the welder. Very easy to do, but it happens all the time when companies think, well, just don't look at the light, you'll be okay, and that's not true. Which is the primary constituent of galvanized steel that causes metal fume fever in welding? A. Iron. B. Copper. C. Manganese. D. Zinc. Excellent. It is D, zinc. Again, you know, somebody asked me the other day, says, do I really have to know all these symptoms? I says, yeah, you're probably going to get 3 or 4. This is the issue, what caused it, whether it be metal fume fever or anything else. I know it's hard. It's a lot of stuff to remember, but this is a tough test. Yeah, as you said, you got it in the ASP. Thank you. Now we'll go into hot works. 60 fatalities since 1990. There's much more than that. It's easily double that. I go to NFPA 51B. This is the industry standard on hot works. OSHA has a very limited hot work standard. So this is the industry standard. It's very controversial because OSHA can cite this. So let's talk about what is hot works by the definition under this NFPA standard, National Fire Protection Association. Welding in allied processes, heat treating, grinding. Grinding used to not be considered hot works, but now it is, because I've had numerous cases where those sparks light something on fire and have put people in the hospital and crippled them. So that's going to be an issue that it's going to be, something you'd want to look at. Thawing pipe with that heat gun. You saw that heat gun used to take off the lead paint. That's what they're talking about. Even though it doesn't look like it's very hot, if you put it against your skin, it would melt your skin. It would burn your skin. Powder driven or fasteners, like powder actuated tools like Hilti, Ramset, Remington, have tools that fire a fastener that looks like a nail into an object. Hot riveting, I don't see anymore. That was the old days when they put up steel buildings with rivets. Torch applied roofing. Anything with a flame is going to be hot works. Big cause of a lot of fire accidents. And anything producing a spark, flame, or heat is hot works. That's pretty generous. So one of the famous accidents, if you go to csp.gov, 4 workers were going to go out and weld a piece of pipe to connect to this vent pipe, but they didn't use a meter to test if this was coming out as a flammable gas. And it was. And so the spark from grinding or welding ignited this. It blew this tank apart. These 2 gentlemen died. This person went into the other tank. That tank blew off and he died, and the welder who was tied off was the only one that survived. But he had a broken hip and an ankle, which is very painful. So that's what it means by hot works. You're going to go out and survey the area around 35 feet or about 11 meters. You're going to take a gas detector that's going to detect for oxygen, flammables, hydrogen sulfide, carbon monoxide, and walk in a 35-foot circle on the ground. Then you get up on here and you're going to check the meter to see if there's 0 flammables. This has killed several people over the years. I learned this at ExxonMobil, and I says, why are we doing this? We're just going to do something with a flash photography. And he says, well, we had a guy drop a light bulb on a lamp, and there was flammable vapors, and that little spark from that light bulb breaking caused us to have part of our refinery burned down. And this is before 1992, so that's what we did. We went up there, we walked the ground, and we walked the upper area. You're putting a globe of 35 feet or 11 meters. What we're talking about, some people, they go over here. He's just grinding the paint off of this old building. So it looks like a pyramid in my state. And the building catches on fire. And next thing you know, it's a $3 million loss. This is where he's going to live. And now you're not going to live there because it's all burnt to 0. That's a lot of money. And I find out when you have insurance companies who have to pay this $3 million to rebuild it, they're going to come after the contractors and everybody else for third-party liability, because that's a lot of money to pay. And the grinding equipment ignited the wood and insulation, because remember, you're going to have an insulated area, and it could be foam insulation. It's not always fiberglass. And that stuff will heat and then melt and then catch on fire. At the bottom of all ships may have oil or other chemicals because things leak, and it usually goes at the bottom. The employee left an oxygen gas hose line in a closed space. So we got now fuel and oxygen at the bottom of the ship. Disconnected the torch at the end of the line, and on a day of explosion, it was still turned on with no torch on it. I've never seen that in my life. Usually the welders, when they take off the welding area, they take the regulators off. But they didn't do it in this case, and 3 people died and 5 got hospitalized in this explosion of the ship. And that's welding safety. You have to make sure that they have had some welding training. Otherwise, I've never seen anybody do that, but this is where somebody did not take off the, regulators. This was very big at the J.P. Morgan Chase. J.P. Morgan is the largest bank in the world, or probably the largest bank in the United States, but if not the world. They're going to go in and cut a live gas line in this multi-story building in Youngstown, Ohio. You cannot cut into any pipe without verifying that it is locked out, bled out, flushed with nitrogen. You cannot do that because that gas that's still in the pipe is going to be flammable and it's going to blow this building apart, and one person died. You would think when you look at the damage, it would kill a lot of people, but there are only a couple people, and some people get, saved. It's a lucky miracle. In a hot work area, knowledge check 17. What is the safety distance that needs to be maintained from a combustible material? 1 foot, A, B, 5 feet, C, 10 feet, D, 35 feet. I talked about it in the ExxonMobil and on the CSP photo. Okay, it's 35 feet. 35 feet is the correct answer. And that's going to be that's a common hot work question. If I had to pick all the hot work questions, that'll be the common question. It's 35 foot. There's nothing usually in any OSHA standards or any safety standards of that much distance. You would think it would be a little shorter, but this is the industry, because sparks and grinding can go a long ways. So one of the things that's nice about safety networking, you'll get to know people 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I went to school with two of the vice presidents of Factory Mutual, biggest insurance conglomerate around for industrial fire insurance. And I was asking them about how many losses have you had related to hot works? And, Russ dug out the data. 736 losses in the last 20 years. $1.9 billion. $2.6 million per loss. Every loss was preventable. And then one of the things we came up with, you got to do a hot work permit by the industry rules. And if you do a hot work permit, you don't have this loss. It's really amazing. Same thing as confined space. You do a confined space permit, you sign it by an authorized individual, the entry supervisor, you're going to have no deaths. You do a hot work permit signed by the permit authorizing individual, that's what they call it, you're not going to have these kind of fires. It's just stunning. But I go to the top data centers in the country and I still see people going to make a weld or grind a weld and it's hitting wood. And I'm out there at one of the largest in the world. It's the first AI data center going to be in the country. All with the what they call the Blackwell chip, and they're going out there. And this is going to be a $15 million loss, $15 billion loss if that catches on fire. They can't have it. I says the sparks are hitting the wood, and you can see. I says, don't they have to have a hot works permit? And you're talking to the top companies in the country from technology and construction. And they said, yeah, let me ask him. He says, well, I'm only going to make a couple, 15 minutes to just grind these welds out. That's how quick you can lose your plant like that. That's how serious it is. So I think a lot of safety professionals don't catch this because they have full 6 times safety people at this facility. 6 safety professionals. It's easy to sit there and have people who do this work all the time say, no, I'm just making a cut. We don't need to do a permit for that. Yes, you do. You're going to create a spark. You're going to create a weld. You're going to do hot work. This building up in Canada, when he did it on the roof, he's using a torch-applied roofing system. No fire watch. Well, once there's a fire, how are you going to put it out? No permit. Lost it. 200 people out of a job. Millions of dollars lost. Millions of dollars, not 2.6 million per average. This is probably 30, 40 million. So what do I see after seeing enough fires over the last 40 years? Propane, welding, arc welding, grinding, cutting, soldering, not so much. The heat gun. Number one cause of a home is that the pipes in the north area where it gets cold, they're using a heat gun, and it will light the wood that's in the house and smolder it and catch it on fire. So they tell people, don't use a heat gun on a thing. But they said, well, my pipes are frozen. I know, but that's like using a welding torch on your pipe. It'll transmit down the copper and melt it, but it'll also heat up the wood. And you need to probably put in some copper lines or remove your lines that are poorly insulated. So how it works at a VPP. OSHA has a voluntary protection program, that's what VPP means, where they recognize the 2,500 safest employers. And I worked with that program for years. This company said when we do work with open or non-open flame, it means grinding, we will make them fill out a hot works permit. And we'll do a risk assessment pre-planning, because we have to talk about why are we doing this? Why do we need to do this? Because sometimes you could just move the object into an area that's not going to have any combustibles and you'll be fine. They're going to have 2 levels of management approval, standby fire watch with an extinguisher. I'm going to tell you, fire extinguishers are cheap. They are, like this little one right here, right behind me, this little red one, they're $20. You can have 5 or 6 of them, because you don't want to hit the fire extinguisher and run out and now your place burns down. Why not just bring 5 or 6 of them, put them on a cart and take them to where you're going to do this hot works at. Constant monitoring. All the chemical companies, Exxon, Lyondell, Citgo, they do constant monitoring. That person is out there always watching for the LEL, because you could leak after you started on a whole shift. So a common one, if I want to pick what causes a lot of building industrial fires, it's the roofer. The roof is leaking. They mark the leaking spot here because the steel underneath the roof is corroded from the roof leak. Even though you don't see the leak in here, you can tell that, when you step on it, it's like pure rubber. There's no steel behind it underneath because it's rotted out. So I got to cut all this rotten steel out. And I'm going to use probably a cutoff saw that's going to be creating a lot of sparks. So I'm going to have a fire watch at the top and also at the other lower levels. Because remember, sparks can go down just as well as go 35 feet horizontally. In Massachusetts, to give you an example of a tragedy, they were working on the roof and doing a metal cap on that roof, and they lighted this building on fire, and 2 firefighters, Mr. Walsh and Mr. Kennedy, died. And NFPA is in Massachusetts. This got so much attention that the state required that you have to have a permit from the fire department to do this. They want to see your hot works program before you have anybody lights up a torch in your facility. And then everybody who's going to do this has to take an approved NFPA training, which is, you go to nfpa.org, you can take a hot works training class for $200. So the NFPA identifies 3 individuals as a hot work safety team. There's a hot work operator, that's the person who's going to do that, a fire watch, and I said it once, what was the other person that's involved in hot works? The entry supervisor, qualified person, permit authorizing individual, or cutting and hot works chief? Excellent. It is the permit authorizing individual. And that person's going to stop work if it's necessary. They're going to be out there watching the job. They're going to make sure there's a fire watch. And you have to do 30 minutes. This is always on the test. A lot of controversy in 2021 when the industry went to 60. NFPA changed it back to 30 in 2024 because of all the pushback this year when people said, we don't have a need to do this. Now, I've been involved in a lot of fires, and I had a case where they were doing torch-applied roofing on a 5-story building. That means they're heating the layers of roofing material with a torch to make it stick better. And the roofer did not do a fire watch or a hot works permit. The general contractor sent a intern up there to see if the roofer was done. And they said, yes, they're packing up, they're going away. And, but I smell something smoldering. Well, you're smelling the torch that was just used. Okay. Smoldering in applying torch. Torch smells like a rubber burning. Wood smells like a smoldering wood fire. They leave. 45 minutes later, it catches on fire and costs hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage, which then the insurance company asked me to say, what's supposed to happen? I said, well, we're supposed to do a hot work permit. And General didn't do one, and the contractor did not do one. Again, no permit, fires. Do a permit, we don't have these fires. I mean, that's stunning data. Alternatives to hot work. Sometimes you can use adhesives instead of hot work torches. Depends on the roof. You have to think about what kind of PPE do we have to wear. Welding helmets, safety shoes, safety glasses, gloves. I like the retroreflective vests because if you're working in the dawn or the dusk, you can see these stripes pretty easily. The fire watch stays for 30 minutes. That's going to be the test question. Probably the third most common. 20 feet, screens, 30 minutes. Again, he's got one extinguisher. He's going through a graded floor. That means there should be somebody at the lower level because the sparks will go right through that graded floor. And I would recommend one. Yes, 30 minutes is the NFPA and the OSHA standard now. There was so much controversy when they went to 60. I wrote the BCSP and they said, we're pulling those questions because we had some controversy. Because you can't have OSHA say 30, the industry say 60, and which is the test? Because I was just asking them. I mean, you got OSHA's 30 and you have the industry 60. Well, when everything went to 30, then it's back down and those questions are back in the test now. They're trained in how to use a fire extinguisher. You will get a question on what is PASS, P-A-S-S. Pull the pin. Aim where? The base of the fire. Squeeze the handle and sweep. Aim at the base. You have to know PASS. That's in our previous one for fire protection. And we make sure that they're not bringing pallets of cardboard in the area. Everybody has a right to stop the work. The hot work operator. Here we're using a cutoff swall. You can see why 35 foot was chosen. This kicks out the most amount of sparks out there. When we go out here, this goes maybe 5 to 6 feet. These go 25, and that's why they made it with a safety factor. I mean, I have seen it light things on fire 20 feet away when the sparks hit it. So that's why this a 35-foot safe distance. They're trained in how to do this. He's got on an aluminized clothing. It's a special type of PPE because the sparks are so heavy. And then, of course, he has to be trained in the saw. Again, I like continuous atmospheric monitoring if you've got any gas pipes within 35 feet or flammable liquid pipes. And again, they stop if something doesn't seem right or smells right. So this is a portion of a NFPA permit. And I only put a portion. There's a lot of good ones out there. You're going to put down, usually for one shift, what are we doing? We're cutting the floor. It's a metal floor. We're going to create a area. What time we start? It's only good for a day or a shift. Hot work's going to be done by the employee or the contractor. If it's a contractor, ExxonMobil or any of these big companies, they will sit there and watch that contractor because they're concerned that facility, which was worth billions of dollars, could go up in smoke because somebody did something wrong. That person who does the hot work permit is going to sign it. One of the things that we find out is when you sign that everything is good, it usually is good. That's why I tell people, you have a permit, you're probably never going to have the fire. I verify the above location has been examined and the precautions marked on the checklist below have been taken and permission is granted for this work. That's a lot of responsibility. And I'm talking 20 years, I can't document a fire where this was done. You're going to have sprinkler, hose stream, extinguishers in service because you're going to have a plan to put out the fire if there's one. Equipment's in good working condition. If you're going to weld on vessels, that's very dangerous, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Everything within 35 feet. All the flammable liquid, oily deposits are removed. Anything explosive is eliminated, inerted. Floors are swept clean of the combustible material. Combustible floors, such as wood floors, are wetted down, covered with a damp, fire-resistant, non-combustible material. In most of my buildings, I have to have the tarps everywhere. Okay, I had a question. I had a company show up for some hot works, asked to see permit. See, there they are. And some companies like Exxon or Archer Daniel Million, they will do the permit for you because it's their plant. They are so worried about somebody making a mistake that it loses their plant. You know, at Exxon and Joliet, you know, when you're making 5-6 million.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Alexa, stop. When you're making $5 or $6 million a day at the refinery, you can't afford to sit there and have somebody who didn't do a permit make a sloppy mistake, and there goes your refinery. Holy smokes. Okay, number 20, probably one of the more common questions. How long does a fire watch stay and inspect after all hot work using torches is completed? A, 45 minutes, B, 30 minutes, C, 2 hours, D, 10 minutes. Okay, everybody got it by heart now. Okay, 30 minutes is correct. We look at compressed gas cylinders. This is an area that people are going to look at. You got these cylinders, can it fall down? Yes. So we're missing a chain. We're looking, oh, the chain is right here. They just didn't put it up. The carrier's not safe. Anything you're going to lift, and this is not related to hot works and welding, this, if you see cracked welds, that's a problem. Any carrier that has stickers should be done by an engineer, because you're going to say that this can lift 1,000 pounds. There's got to be some testing above 125% that somebody did at a lab or has some documents that show that this is not going to fall apart if we put 10, cylinders in that could be at that capacity. This is a common OSHA violation. The cylinder was not chained or secure. Even though it's got the cap on, they don't want to find out if that cap will break off or not. Usually, no. And they don't want the electrical cord. That's in a bad situation too. Here we are. This is compressed gas cylinders. They're stored. They're not prevented from falling off, rolling off the edge of the dock. Here we got kind of like a rope. We just tied it in a knot and we kind of hope it, but if none of these are labeled, but if you've been around, black is always a settling. So short back cylinder like this, oxygen. So we already violated the 20-foot rule. These other cylinders, some are color-coded, but there are no labels. These are GHS violations. So we don't know what these are. We don't know if that's nitrogen or propane or what it is. And again, here's our valve cap missing. It's tied, it's secured properly, but where's the cap at? If you get these cylinders from a distributor, you can call them up. They have thousands of these caps. It's like nothing to bring in a cap out for them the next time they visit, or you can send somebody to go get one. And of course, housekeeping. This is pretty congested. The welder usually doesn't get hurt other than breathing in bad fumes. They're going to wear safety glasses, a bandana. They're going to wear a auto darkening helmet that will change to match the intensity of the light. That's been around for over 30 years now. A welding jacket that can handle the sparks, it's not going to melt. A leather apron, which is not going to melt either. And then usually denim pants and leather shoes. That's what I usually see. So we talked about welding on drums or tanks. Several fatalities, over 100 fatalities in the last 25 years. He's going to use a powered abrasive cutoff saw to cut open a 2,000-gallon fuel tank. This is a 55-gallon drum. I see this all the time. It's every month. Somebody sits there and said, I washed it out. Well, that's good, but the residue from the heat can evaporate and then create a flammable environment. And the ignition of vapor blew off and killed him and ignited his truck, I've had several accidents I've investigated with this. So what's the primary purpose of using a valve protection cap on the gas cylinders? A, to regulate the flow of gas. B, to protect the valve from physical damage. C, to measure the gas pressure. D, to make the cylinders easier to transport. And the answer is B, to protect against physical damage. Some of these questions are going to be, easy on the test. And then I always say, when you study all the questions in the study group and do the videos and take pocket prep for the ASP CSP or the Momentix CHST or the Click Safety CHST books, you're going to know 100 questions. It's whether you can get those extra 11 to put you over. Now we got a couple at the end of the class here. The industrial hygienist samples the welders in your company and finds overexposure to iron oxide. That is actually what OSHA finds the most, overexposure to welding fume. Which disease has been caused by inhaling iron fume from welding over a period of years? Is it A, siderosis, B, welder flash syndrome, C, heat exhaustion, or D, chrome fume fever? Now, I didn't cover this one. See if we can get it. Very good. It is A, siderosis. And then last one, which hazardous metal oxide is associated with welding on stainless steel? A, iron, B, manganese, C, chromium, D, zinc. Answers all over the board, but the correct answer is C, chromium. Any questions? Take your kid to work. Don't look at this. He's welding, and nobody's got PPE. What are you doing? This is bad welding, like me. But thank you very much for coming. I'll put this on YouTube. You'll be able to look at it within a couple hours, and then next month is going to be truck and marine transportation. They're adding a lot of questions on marine transportation for the CSP, and people are getting 3 to 5 questions on that, which is odd. But they wrote a whole bunch of 175 new questions in May, and testing out a lot of these new questions, and some of them will be permanent. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming. I'll see you next month.